Have you ever stopped and asked yourself what separates companies that excel at planning for success from those that are regularly frustrated by the planning they do? Let's have ourselves a pocket-sized pep talk because my guest today says it all comes down to one word: trust. Without trust, there's second guessing, and that creates waste, and that creates inefficiency, and that undermines performance. And, well, let's see if we can solve this in today's podcast.
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jolles.
Today's guest, Greg Spira, is an expert in demand management and integrated business planning. His new book, Trust the Plan: Demand Management for Business Leaders, shares how to ensure cross-functional collaboration, alignment of plans, and teamwork in any demand plan process. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Great to be here, Rob. Thanks for having me today.
It's good to have you here. And so with you, I want to dive right in. I want to start with what most of us kind of start with as authors, which is kind of what led you to write the book. You know, the book finds you, you find the book. But, books are not to be messed with. That's quite a commitment. What drove you to this topic?
So I sometimes say it was what led me down the path was equal parts ignorance and tenacity. So I knew at the start of writing this book that, there's been a gap in material published from, at least from our organization, in the demand management space. Our last book that was published as an organization was like 20 years ago. We wrote one of the standards on planning in this space. And so I knew I wanted to contribute something more up to date. But as I started getting into writing the book, it took a life of its own, and I ended up rewriting it. Like about halfway through, I was writing more technical about like how do you forecast and how do you think about bringing information together as an organization. But it took a life of its own when I realized that through my experience working with clients and understanding what's working and what's not working with them, that there was a bigger game at hand here that we could really talk about, like that trust, getting to that one word, because it became apparent to me as I was working through this that it's not about how to do demand management. Lots of businesses are out there doing it. They don't even know it's called that. What it was that realizing that, say, hey, if we're working as a team in an organization, and we want to trust each other, right? Great teams that are successful have team players that trust each other, right? They play their positions, and they know that if I pass the puck, I'm using a Canadian analogy, that pass the puck, the guy's going to receive the pass, and then we're going to be able to score the goal. We're going to work together. Then I put that in the position of a sales or marketing person, someone using the commercial side of the business. What do I have to do to be that trustworthy teammate? That's where it evolved from just like how to do, good planning and forecasting from a sales perspective to like, actually, what are those trustworthy behaviors so that I can be part of that team in a way that's successful. So that was kind of the how it evolved. And so it's a bit of a bridge. It's partially, for folks that are looking, leaders who want to understand how to work on a large organization as a teammate. And also appeals to people who actually, maybe in the space of demand planning or demand management or forecasting who want to up their game. So kind of applies to both.
Okay, gotcha. Now, I want you to know I did some research on you, and one of the first things I looked up was demand management, because I wasn't 100% sure what that exactly meant. Right. And I'm going to want to spend most of our time on trust, but I am now equipped with a good definition, but you're the author, just so people can follow us along. Let's make sure everybody knows what we're talking about when we keep using the term demand management.
Yeah. So you can think of it like, if you've never heard the term, you can think of it like sales planning. Another way to think of it is like, what are we doing in our company in order to generate demand for our products and services? So if I'm going in promoting, if you think back to like business school of the 4 Ps, right? Price and promotion and product. What are we doing as a business to make people want to buy our products and services, right? Yeah. So that every company does it. The formal sort of term for this is demand management when you're in a large enough organization where you actually have to have an organization who's pulling all that information together to work with finance and manufacturing and supply chain and all these different groups together. But, you could have an ice cream stand on and have to do demand management. Like, it's just not always called that. And I know when I started, I was doing it before I even knew it was called that. My career started in finance, and I was doing sales planning, and didn't know it was necessarily called demand management formally. But when you get into large organizations, the big CPG companies, that it's a pretty well-known term in that space.
Yeah. And, years ago, before we had print on demand, I think, the book world was a lot of, I guess, demand management. It was looking at an author like you and saying, okay, how many books we got? How many are we going to print up here so we don't get caught, or we don't, have so many that they're dying on the shelves there. So I guess in its crude form, that was a form of demand management. Do I have it right?
Right. And that's where a lot of the practice started very often. If you go way back in time, from supply chain, having to make those decisions. Think about it, right? So, but it's not only the guys printing the books that have to know how many books you're going to sell, because it's the finance guys who are saying, well, what's our budget going to be for next year? I got to figure out how many books am I going to sell. It's the sales and marketing folks who are tasked with having to grow the business that say, well, how many to sell last year? How many do I think I need to sell next year in order to stay competitive, right? So you need to know it for all sorts of reasons. And that's where this whole teamwork and trust comes into play. Because if we were just only interested in forecasting how many I needed to make, it would be a narrower problem to solve. You might not even need to include the sales and marketing folks in the conversation, right? You just say, they're going out there doing their thing. And we'll sit back in the back of the shop and the supply chain side and just make sure that we don't run short. But when you start thinking about all those other activities in the business that have to be coordinated around it, and really that planning what you're going to sell next quarter or next year is an important thing if I'm a brand manager and I'm trying to grow my brand, or if I'm, a sales manager trying to manage a sales territory, I need to know that too. What's important is that we shouldn't all have our own different views of what that's going to be. Otherwise, we're not going to work together well as a team. It's like, going back to my hockey analogy. If we all don't know what the play is, it's not going to work, right? We're going to get all mixed up on the ice or on the field. So that then turns to, okay, who's going to set the play for what we're going to sell? Well, it doesn't make sense for the supply chain guy to set the play for what we're going to go and sell, because he's not the one selling anything, right? It's up to the sales and marketing folks to set the plan for what they're going to sell. But then in organizations that do this well, when the sales guy or the marketing guy or both of them together say, this is what we're going to sell next year, the rest of the organization trusts them and says, cool, if that's the case, then this is what I'm going to make, and this is how we're going to set our budgets, and this is what we're going to go and do. But in those organizations, I'm sure some of your listeners are sitting there saying, well, in my company, if I listen, the sales guy says he's going to sell 100, I can't trust him. He's full of, you know what, right? Like, he's probably either sandbagging, even the term sandbagging, that's what we call sales people all the time. We call them sandbaggers, right?
Well, you do. I don't call them sandbaggers.
I don't know. Wow. Some people might say that.
Right, right.
If you've heard the term used, maybe in that space, well, that's an example of where we don't trust people, right? We're second guessing, we're hedging. The finance guy saying, yeah, I heard what Bob in sales said, but you know what? Bob in sales he's always saying a number that's too high, or he's always overly optimistic, or he's always too pessimistic. And so then you get they're judging things down, or making adjustments, or having second side conversations on what they think the real number is. And all that that spawns a culture of second guessing, distrust, hedging. And then that leaves the organization confused, right? Because now we got people saying, well, I got to figure out if I'm in the logistics department or something like that, trying to figure out how many trucks I need to book for next month. Whose number am I following, right? Am I following the finance number? Am I following the sales number? Am I following this? Am I, who do I trust? Right. Really, the best organizations have very trustworthy commercial leaders who, when they communicate and they say, this is what I'm going to go and do, everyone else trusts and can line up and follow. But it's the same with any function, but it's creating that trust within the team. So really, you got to start with the premise that that's even important. You start with the premise that it's important for us to plan and trust each other, which that's where I lead in with the book is, and it sounds sort of somewhat intuitive, but then you find a lot of organizations where it doesn't exist, and you'd ask the question.
Right. Let me put a peg in it this for just a second. Okay. I got you. First of all, thank you, because I am kind of very myopic. I look at one. I am a sales guy. Sort of look at product. Even my example I threw up is how many books are they going to print, because I'm thinking like an author now.
Mhm.
What I'm thanking you for is a reminder that there's a whole chain that follows that. And sometimes we're only seeing the part that's actually affecting us,
Right.
and not the infrastructure that's bringing it to the table. So thanks for that, number one, because that's a reminder that it's kind of a blind spot for a lot of us, I think, particularly in sales. It's what's our number and can you get me product?
Yep.
The rest of you all figure out what you're doing, because we're usually out in the field. We're not really into that home office. So, okay,
Right.
one, great point you made. Two, the reason why I say I want to slow down on trust is because I'm interested in your angle. I hear authors talking about trust all the time, and including this author. Okay, and I found that it's a lot harder to process that. In other words, we'll say it, but
Mhm.
finding repeatable, predictable actions that are measurable,
Mhm.
that's a little tougher when it comes to trust. So I know I know you've got leaders, you've got people that are asking for it. Uh, are there some specific moves that you're writing about or talking about that put a process behind it?
That's exactly right. So yes, and that's I sometimes say to people, like, the minute you can't force or tell somebody to trust, you can't dictate trust.
Right.
And I use the example: the minute somebody says "trust me,"
Mm.
you trust them less.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
The minute you hear those words, "Oh, just trust me," you're like, your antenna go up, and you're like, why would I trust this person? So you have to earn trust, right? And so the best way to build trust isn't to seek trust, it's to earn it. It's to be trustworthy. And so those prescriptions, the things that I lay out in the book to say, what are the things you should do as a sales leader or marketing leader or business leader to be trustworthy? What are those things? And there's some simple things. Some are measurable. Some are manage your sort of say do ratio, like do what you say what you do. So we call that measuring whether or not you tend to have a bias. Am I always overly optimistic? Am I always overly conservative? Sometimes when you use the example, like, I just want you to have the product I need to sell. And so that can sometimes have salespeople say, give me more than I think I need, because I don't want to ever be short. But in reality, people will catch on to that game, right? They'll know, oh, he's always asking for more than he needs. So then I'm always trying to figure out how much to second guess and down judge. It only ever works if you say, I'm going to call the middle of the road. I'm going to tell you what I believe. I might be higher, I might be lower, but you can't guess better than what I'm telling you. So there's an element of, like, can I measure, am I giving you a biased answer? Am I being unbiased in what I tell you? And when I'm being unbiased, you have really a whole lot less reason to second guess what I'm telling you, because you can't come up with a better answer than I can just by looking at my pattern of history. There's other elements that we get into in the book on, use another example. You go to the bank and say, I want to start my ice cream stand that I said earlier. I said, I need a loan for $100,000. Trust me, right? Can I have the $100,000? Is the bank going to say, yeah, here's $100,000? No, they're going to ask for a business plan, right? They're going to say, tell me what you're doing. Explain to me, how are you going to generate profit from this ice cream stand, or whatever you're going to go and do. So it's the same thing applies here, right? If I'm a salesperson, I say, I'm going to sell $100,000 worth of product next month. It helps a lot more to say how or why. What are my assumptions? What am I going to go and do? Just explain the plan. Maybe not in all of detail, but tell me generally, what are you going to go and do in order to make it happen? It's not that you have to, like, everyone has to get into your shorts, as they say, and understand all the nitty gritty of what you're doing. But it'll go a long way for people to be able to go, yeah, actually, I trust this guy. He told me his plan makes sense, and he has a habit of consistently being close, or not being consistently high or consistently low. All right, now that's two things that I've done that are trustworthy, right? And so start to build those things out. What are those things that it's not a whole lot of work, but it's just the behaviors of telling the story, explaining what you're doing, caring about the rest of the team, and all those other downstream impacts that we said, and then leading with those trustworthy behaviors.
Yeah. I want to sort of circle that series of behaviors. I think you nailed it there. It's funny. I write about a lot of process behaviors and maneuvers. And everybody wants things are measurable, but I have yet to find someone who can actually process trust. It's more of, listen, I can tell you a bunch of little things to do. You bundle them together, it's more powerful than you think. Um, but it doesn't necessarily follow a pattern. In other words, from a sales perspective, for instance, the closest I could ever get to it is well, if you figure out what an open probe is, and you not only ask questions, but you keep them open, get somebody talking, stay off the problem early, actively listen, and begin with the end in mind. In other words, right here, if we're looking at forecasting, I'm not asking questions about, what's playing at the movie theaters. We're asking about changes they may see in their customer base, things that maybe they're picking up from the field that we don't see. That's beginning with the end in mind. I'm not writing a thesis paper on it. I'm trying to manage that information. But at the end of the day, that's from a sales perspective, that's as close as we can get. What I really like is, and I'm seeing it myself in some of my writing is, sorry, Rob, even though I'm an ex-Xerox guy, it's not everything has this mythical process, but they have some sort of best actions, best things to do, things that will grade at it. Even what you said, trust me. And from the sales side, negotiation side, it's the best I can do. Of course, it isn't the best you can do. You were just insulting me. Believe me when I say this. Well, now I don't. There's so many just irritators that people use. So little things like learning how to remove those irritators doesn't guarantee trust. But I'll tell you, I'd rather learn that than not learn it. It's going to move us forward. I think that's what you're after there. And I appreciate that, because I'm not sure I believe that we can just do these 6 things in sequence and now everybody trusts you. It just doesn't work that way.
Well, it's interesting. If I follow the sales thread, you would, a sales guy would naturally, I think, believe me when I said you've got to earn the trust of your customer, right?
Yep.
Because you can't tell your customer what to do. They got to trust you in order to get where you want to go. But they might find it a bit weird to say, but you also have to earn the trust of the people in your own organization who are working to support you. Some might say, well, that doesn't make sense. They're paid, like I should be able to tell manufacturing what to do. They work for, they work for our organization. The truth is, and I, you could say some organizations, and probably 30, 50 years ago, it might have been in some organizations long ago with the sort of command and control structure, right? A sort of a more militaristic kind of structure. People would follow orders blindly. People don't follow orders blindly anymore. People tend to feel empowered to do what they believe is best for the company. And so you end up in that situation where people who are second guessing what they hear from the sales and marketing organization aren't doing it because they're malicious. They're not doing it because they're trying to be insubordinate. They're doing it because they think it will be better for the company for them to fix the mistake or correct for the bias or, adjust for and save the company from the sales or marketing person. And so it's therefore just as important to have to build the trust inward in your company as it is to build the trust outward with your clients.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's not as intuitive to people as they might, as it could be, or intuitive at all, quite frankly, to people. And therefore, it's a skill that they might have to work on, right? Things you got to practice or things you got to actually test and just actually ask the question. Talk to people in your organization. You might go around and say, hey, when I give you a number, if I make a commitment, do you trust me? Like, do you tend to override it? Do people second guess it? You might be surprised what you find out.
Yeah, I think a classic example of that, Greg, is the battle between service and sales, or marketing and sales, or whatever. They're on their island, we're on ours. The best thing I ever learned about selling a Xerox copier was becoming best friends with the service tech that was in the area. One of my internal customers, as you described them, who was getting a completely different story from the customer because the customer trusted them. They didn't feel that they were being sold anything. And so why would I be in conflict with my own internal customer. And yet there's still this battle that goes on. And it's amazing. Trust the Plan, Demand Management for Business Leaders. That's Greg Spira's book. And I'm assuming we can find it on Amazon and online stores, all that kind of stuff, right?
That's right. And if you can't find the link, my website, gregspira.ca.
Perfect. And
the link is right there. Yeah.
Good. And we'll put that link up on our homepage, et cetera. So we'll make sure people get that. All right, let's keep digging a little bit. Is there a way to measure performance against the plan that you're establishing? In other words, with golf, I think, the classic way of measuring it is how far did you just hit the ball? We trainers, we know that we're looking for distance and accuracy, but we're also looking to try and measure the swing. We feel if we can get the eyes on the swing, that eventually we'll get the distance and we'll get the accuracy. So how about from your perspective?
Well, there's a couple of different measures. There is, like, you got to be able to measure that. Like I said earlier, that sort of like say-do ratio of like, did I deliver what I said I would deliver? But there's also another element of it, like with sales and with anything that's not everything is within your control.
Right.
You also have to measure, whether the outcome, right? Did I generate the revenue that I said I was going to generate? Did I close the deals that I said I would commit to close? But there's another element of it is like, first thing you want to do is, did I do the things I said I would do, right? So if I said, hey, I'm going to make 10 sales calls this month, and that's the assumption, or hey, I'm going to hire 5 new salespeople in this new territory, or hey, the actions that would drive demand. Back to the whole definition of demand in the first place is, what are the actions and activities we're going to go and do? We look to measure, did we do the things? And then separately measure, did the things we're doing drive the results that we wanted to drive, right? So sort of like splitting those in two, because it makes it a little easier, a little more comfortable, especially when you're in that seat, because you have some of the stuff you have control over. I can control if I'm going to go hire those people, if I'm going to go and expand into those territories, if I'm going to launch those products. I can't always control whether or not people are going to like it and whether they're going to sign up. That some of that stuff's out of the control. But by splitting the measurements there and thinking about those two things separately, I can build the trust, right? Because I can people say, if I said I was going to do this, I went and did it. Now I can carve out the true thing that's unknown, right? Is whether or not with the result of this. If we just wrote a new book, I don't know whether people are going to like it or not. Well, I said I would write it. I said it would be done by this time. I'm trustworthy. People trust me that I'm going to get that done. Then we can all be kind of working towards, how do we better understand the problem around whether people are going to like it or not, or whether or not the results of that, let's say it's a new marketing campaign, or if it's the features of a product being successful, or if it's any of those types of activities. And then we can work on solving the problem of how do we better make that predictable. But at least that's not on me as the guy who's going and doing my part of the job, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an excellent point. We when I'm talking, by the way, for the record, I'm a lousy golfer, but I love using it as it's a great metaphor for a lot of different things. And pulling it off the golf and into what we do, a lot of times, that measuring the distance of the flight of the ball is measuring how much product we sold. Measuring the swing of the golfer is measuring the process and the techniques that we're following and tactics to achieve those goals. And it's funny how many companies lose sight of the latter there. And they're just measuring the distance, which I think would probably feed into trust, particularly when we're training. You may not know this, but I get asked all the time. Even I left Xerox 30 years ago. I still get asked, how did Xerox do it? How do they implement so many process quality when they were going up against the Japanese when the patents were lifted on copying and their sales? A lot of times, I'm not so sure about today, but there was Xerox ruled the earth at one point in terms of being known as the finest sales force in the world, best trained. How do they implement that? I know they're teaching it. Other companies are teaching their people to sell, and it speaks to what you're speaking to. Part of the way I was evaluated as a salesperson was clearly where I was in terms of the plan for that year. Was I above plan, at plan, below plan? Great. But I could be 300% of my given plan. If I wasn't following the techniques, the processes, and I was watched, I was monitored minimum of 4 times a year. if I wasn't following the process that we were using, I was knocked down in that area, which meant I was basically performing at a C level, even though I was this superstar. And Greg, that takes guts. I don't know, from me. It takes guts from management, from a corporation, to say that's how important this swing is.
Well, I'll tell you that that's a great example to key off of, right? So let's say I'm in that mode where like I'm delivering 300% of my plan. You got to ask yourself the question: is that okay? Is that good? Well, if you didn't tell anybody that you were going to be delivering 300% of your plan, and the guys in the supply chain side don't have enough product to meet this sales you've got, then that's a problem. You're just disappointing customers. You've gone out and written checks that your company can't cash. And you could be sitting there high-fiving all day long that you're at 300%, but the rest of the business is struggling, right? The courageous leaders actually manage that and measure that and don't celebrate the people that are like knocking out of the park without the team sport mentality, right? Without working it as a team. Conversely, my clients that consistently hit their plan, hit their budgets, are the ones that aren't afraid of saying when they're at a risk of missing it. You know, it's often the taboo, right? Like, don't tell me you're going to miss your plan. I want you to tell me you're going to hit your plan. Well, if you don't tell anybody when you're at risk of missing it, you've got nobody to help you figure out how to close the gap, right? The best organizations embrace the gaps. They say, show me where you got risks. Show me where you think you're not going to hit it. And we'll work together as a team in order to figure out how to close it. But it comes back to that team sport analogy that if salesperson A has an opportunity to over deliver on one product and salesperson B is having something's changed, right? We're living in the world where there's no way you can set a budget at the start of the year and then deliver exactly that budget by the end of the year. It's going to be up somewhere, down somewhere else. You got to see those ups and downs. You got to let people communicate that. Comes back to, you got to be able to trust the sales team to communicate regularly. You got to be able to have those plans. So it's the reason for planning in the first place, so that I can know whether or not I'm at risk or not of delivering on those goals and objectives. So your kind of golf game analogy is like, if I was a robot and I could hit the ball 300 yards dead straight every time wherever I aimed, I wouldn't have the best golf game if I couldn't. It would only, the wind or how the greens were mowed or all those other external variables. If I'm not being honest with what I'm facing when I'm stepping up into the tee box and looking at the headwinds or the things that are going wrong, and I'm just ignorant of it, then I'm not going to do well. I got to be able to embrace those things. So that's, that comes into, especially as we were writing the front end of the book, is all about planning and why it's so important to recalibrate those things. Because you know what? I'll go back to my 300% scenario. It might not be the right thing for the organization for me to oversell my plan by 300% and think I'm high-fiving it, because you know what? I might be a low margin sales channel. I might need that product might be best served somewhere else, right? There's sometimes the greater good of the company that we need to think about than just my particular piece of the pie.
Yeah, I'm actually shaking on this end because I've never been told I'm 300% of plan. Rob, there's good and bad of that 300% of plan. But again, what was the first thing I told you when we started, where I went, aha? 2 minutes into our conversation, I am very focused and trained as a salesperson, as a sales manager, as a sales trainer and sales coach, to get that 300%. And let the company worry about. And you know what? I'll be 20% of plan next year if I can't, if my customers are not taken care of properly because I wasn't communicating.
There is an element of who we were targeting with this, because it's business leaders, right? Not everybody, and I'm not expecting the entire sales force to have to understand all the nuances of so just to get that out of the way, because I might want some trained killers out there that are just solely focused on going and driving that. But I absolutely want my sales VPs and my executive team on the commercial side to understand these nuances and be able to manage that sales force to know, hey, and they're moving the chess pieces on the board to work it that way. So there's it's a balancing act there too as well, because some might be cringing a little bit, thinking like, I don't want my entire sales force focused on how the supply chain is going to back it up. But I do
No, but
want
I
some.
want that
I
sales
want
force
some.
communicating, Greg. And that's, I
Absolutely.
think, the point that you're making. I have to trust
Exactly.
that I'm getting the right answers, even if it's not good news, that I'm getting the right answers from the sales force. And I'm mildly apologizing because I don't always do this, but I've been crowbarring you for some reason into the world of sales. Believe me, we got a lot of managers and entrepreneurs that are listening right now. So I'll back off a little bit. It's almost selfishly, I'm just looking at and playing it off in my head. But I don't care where we are. We've got to be communicating with our internal channels. And if we're not, that's going to be a problem. Give me a couple more takeaways from your book. Rob, stop talking about sales all the time. Tell me a couple more. And I like takeaways, things that I could do differently tomorrow that I would learn from your book. Don't give it all away because people are gonna be buying that book and writing reviews on that book. You hear me?
Yeah.
Pocket Sized Pep Talk world, but a couple takeaways.
So I think it is broader than just the the sales team. If you think about your organization, you've got people developing new products. You've got people in R&D, you've got finance organization, you got a lot of players at stake. And one of the things we do through the book is there's a fictitious company, kind of a little bit of role play sort of described through it to give people like stories and examples. In fact, that's again another reason why I wrote it. Is I've worked with dozens of clients across all different industries, right? So all the stories through the book are real life. Like these are real things I've encountered in terms of dysfunction and companies not being able to succeed or looking for help. So if you're not in sales, but you're in marketing or product development or even supply chain, or you're a planner, or you aspire to leadership, right? There's always an angle there to say, what do I need to know, right? What should I learn about the people above me in the organization or the people around me in the organization, and how those dynamics work. So there's a value in being able to better understand that. There's a term people might be familiar with or might not, but sales and operations planning or integrated business planning. The organization I work with literally wrote the original books on that. They invented it 40, 50 years ago. And so there's an introduction to that in this as well. So a takeaway from the book is decent understanding of how does a business, a larger organization, coordinate itself in a best practice way. So you'll get that, and then the elements of what does it take to then be trustworthy in that, and it even gets down to specific examples. We go through like, hey, if I back to my said earlier about if I'm going to the bank and asking for a loan and they're tell me your business plan. Well, what are some ways, if I'm in sales or marketing or product development or any of these areas, what are some ways that I can communicate my plan in a way that makes sense, right? A lot of times we think about a budget or a sales plan or anything like that. We think of the numbers, right? We think like, how am I going to get my budget? It's going to be some Excel spreadsheet I'm going to get, right? But somebody told me years ago, the plan isn't an Excel document; it's a Word document. It's the words. It's the what am I going to go and do? So there's examples on how can I put those words in place? How can I construct that in a way that's helpful? And then it even getting into sort of the last angle of it is how can I behave? Like what do I need to do to be a trusted advisor in an organization? What are those like personal skills and interpersonal skills, whether it's EQ or like, not having a low level of self-orientation is the term we use. Like, how do I show up as not being all about me, but being about the team? How do I show up as actually caring about the people around me? So there's threads into all of those elements. So it's a fair bit that can help because it all comes together and matters. It's about the people, it's about the process, and it's about the tools that we're using to run it.
Excellent. I got 1.5 more questions for you. Here's my half. Give me a reason to go to your website, and I'm not just trying to get people to pile your website. I mean, I love the book. Is there something that supports the book? Are there job aids? Is there a way other than reaching out to you individually? What am I going to learn to support this conversation if I jump to your website?
So website, so precursor to the book, and actually post-cursor, if that's even a word. But I've written a number of white papers on these sort of like sort of bite-sized, like, hey, I want to understand about being biased or unbiased, or hey, I want to read about how can I share assumptions in my plan better. All that's up there for free, right? So you can go to the website, you can download the white papers, you can peruse them. I do have a blog where I write articles and post it on LinkedIn, but they're all there on the website, so you can go back and read through those. Anything that I've got that I've published freely, it's there for people to use, because that plus the book, that's obviously, I'm not getting rich off the book. It's a passion, right? It's a passion for helping. And it's really being able to see people. I love when people will take and read a white paper or do something and implement something. I love when I hear about that, when they tell me, hey, I took this, I used it, it worked, it helped me in this way. So there's plenty out there. And yeah, feel free to, people reach out to me on LinkedIn or drop an email or send me a text. I'm happy to hear from people who are looking for help.
Quiz question, because I'm a blog writer. Of course, I call them articles, but how many are you consistent on your blogs?
I am medium consistency.
When was the last time you posted a blog?
Probably about a month ago. I have to look it up.
I'm okay if I can get you once a month. I'm putting a test on you, because sometimes I see these blogs and I would be like, 3 years ago this guy wrote a blog.
It's tricky because there's a fine line between I don't like to have to try to force myself to come up with something.
Yeah.
It's usually when I'm with a client and I'm like, oh, this is an issue that I'm seeing a lot of people deal with right now. Like when we were in the middle of a pandemic, there was consistent issues that people were dealing with. Now we're coming up the other side of it and everyone's got excess inventory and all these other issues. The issues that I'm seeing, that's the stuff that I'm passionate about writing about. So I usually tie it to an issue. So
good.
I don't try to force myself to come up with something when I don't.
All right. Good answer. You. All right. Here's the last question. Somebody last week complimented me and said, Rob, love your podcast. And I love that question you ask, which is, what's one question that I should have asked you? And I said, well, thank you. I'm very grateful. And I thought it's interesting because I've never asked that question. However, I think I'm going to start asking. So let's close us down with nice and simple, but maybe one question I didn't ask you that you think this audience should hear about.
I guess it's you didn't ask me what keeps me busy day to day outside of writing the book and publishing articles. So my day job is with an organization called Oliver White, and we help coach large organizations, small organizations of all different shapes and sizes in their planning processes. So if your company or you're interested in getting help, that's stuff that we do. So I don't do this from a basis of theory. I do this from a basis of actually having done it myself in my career. Like actually was in industry doing this stuff, much like you were, you carried the bag. Yep. It's a lot more credible when you're telling people what to do, what not to do, when you've got the scar tissue of having done it wrong and learned from those mistakes. So I've learned from a lot of mistakes and then subsequently helped, a lot of large organizations, small organizations of various different shapes and sizes drive success as well. So that's what I do from a day job perspective every single day. So if there's people out there that are looking for advice from somebody who's seen it and done it, that's what I'm looking to help people with.
Perfect. And how would they get a hold of you?
All the contact information is there on the website, but LinkedIn's a great way. My email address is there. Don't be shy. Yeah.
And let me spell that for you folks. It's Greg, Greg. That's the easy part. Spira is Spira. So just make sure you get that right, and you'll be able to reach out to him. Well, I am grateful you were able to spend some. Oh, he's got one more thing he wants to say. What's that?
.ca, because I am Canadian, so the website gregspira.ca.
.ca. I would have never known it with all the hockey examples. I was a point guard, but I was like, I think I can follow him. All right, I know the Gretzky, be where the puck's going to be or whatever, but that's about the only one I've got on the hockey side. But okay. Anyway, listen, Greg. thank you. Truly, really appreciate when a guy sits down and I'm very grateful when I get to learn a few things. And like I said, you had me about 3 minutes in, and the casualty was I couldn't get out of my own sales hat on it. But no, it was. I think we got an audience that's going to want to apply it to that angle, so I think we're good there. But anyway, I am just thrilled you were able to spend some time with me, and I thank you for the time you gave us.
Likewise, thank you for taking the time to hear what I had to say.
You do. Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time, folks. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.